we'll never be ready for a true disclosure because this reality is, I tend to think, is probably awe-inspiring and deeply profound.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Watch Mojo and Unveiled. I'm your host, Rob, and today we're diving back into the topic of UFOs or UAPs. Today's guest is a leading UFO researcher and historian, and one of my favorite voices in the UFO community, Richard Dolan. Richard, thank you for joining us today.
Rob, thank you. I'm really happy to be here with you.
So let's kick this off by maybe just a brief introduction about yourself and how you got into this field in the first place, which I feel like is a fascinating story for people to hear.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I've told this a couple of times, but I've come to feel like it's a useful little bit of background for someone who's new to UFOs in general. They're thinking like, what is the big deal about this? Should I take this seriously or not? A little over 30 years ago, I knew essentially nothing about UFOs, but I was working toward a PhD in the field of history, U.S. diplomatic history. And so I was studying about America in the 1940s, 1950s, and this type of thing. Uh, and then I was in a bookstore in the early 90s, and I basically stumbled across this UFO conspiracy book called Above Top Secret. And it was a subtitle that caught my attention, The Worldwide UFO Cover-Up, by a really good author named Timothy Good, who's a great guy. And I remember flipping through the book thinking, oh, wow. Like even in the early 90s, there were those of us who'd heard claims of a UFO cover-up. It wasn't like we hadn't no idea about it, but I just didn't know. And I looked at, he's got one declassified document and this general and this CIA director and these people making statements about this subject. And I thought, this is entirely absent from the academic world. There is not a single study that I could find in my university's library on this. And I thought, why is this absent? Even if this subject was a big mistake, if you had generals and admirals mistakenly interested in flying saucers back in 1950, how would that not be interesting? Like, why would there be no historical treatment of this whatsoever? And I thought, well, let's explore this for a little while. And I thought, so I bought the book and I thought I'll spend 2 or 3 months. This was my thinking back then. And I'll dive into it. I'll master the subject and move on. So famous last words, because this is a very deep subject indeed. And what I discovered quickly was that this was indeed, as Timothy Good argued, being taken very seriously by high level, responsible national security personnel in the US and in other countries as well. And then you're led to the question, well, why? Why would they take this seriously? And you quickly see why, because there were objects described as disc-shaped, silent, very quiet, able to hover, able to instantly accelerate, being chased by our jet or our aircraft interceptors unsuccessfully. And you could see their documents where they're taking this quite seriously, and they are perplexed. At the same time, they're telling the public, nothing to see here. It's all hoaxes and hallucinations and ordinary objects. So obviously, there is a discrepancy, and I couldn't pursue my formal studies with this big question mark hanging over it. Was this a thing or was this not a thing? And so I just stayed with it. And that was more than 30 years ago. And what I've discovered is it's an absolutely riveting topic. It opened more doors than I had ever imagined. I mean, intellectual doors, like doors about our world, our society. Um, yeah, because every time you answer one question, 10 more open up. It's like, okay, so they took this seriously. This does seem to be extraordinary. Was it Russian? Doesn't look like it. Was it ours? Doesn't look like it. How could they keep a secret for so long? Then you start looking at the media. You start looking at the political aspects of the cover up and on and on. And it just snowballs into this massive, uh, all consuming topic that is by far the most rewarding subject that I could have ever imagined getting into.
So, having been invested in this for the past 30 years, do you feel that we're now reaching a turning point? 2017 was a big year with that New York Times article, which was a
Yeah.
bombshell. It kind of like changed the way that the public discusses UFOs and addresses them. And I think, started treating it with more respect. And we've been getting revelation after revelation with the congressional hearings, the testimony from Navy pilots and military personnel, and et cetera. So does it feel like we're reaching, the light at the end of the tunnel as far as disclosure is concerned, in your view?
I would say yes and no. There has definitely been a change since 2017. It shocked me as much as anybody else. I was not expecting that there would be not one, but two articles in one day on the New York Times describing this subject as something real and legitimate. So, and that, by the way, there was also one the same day in Politico, which was also a significant article. So it was like this huge explosion in our little community, little at the time. And and there has been a major sea change in how we as a society are able to talk about this. So we can now talk about UAP, not UFOs, but UAP uh, in national context without ridicule, without people rolling their eyes, with no X-Files music anymore. All of that is gone. So that's absolutely a positive thing. Now the question is, where are we now, and where is this conversation? So where we are able to discuss the fact that there seems to be something real that is unexplained. So that's good. We're still very far from a national conversation about this being a technology that's not from our civilization. We get hints here and there, but we've been dancing around this little subject now for 7 years. I mean, the ET question, or the non-human, the NHI question, has been sitting there in the room for these last 7+ years, and we're still not really addressing it, nor are we really addressing the implications. Like, what does it mean that the United States government has engaged in a 70, 80-year lie to the public about this subject? And we're still not engaging in the questions of, well, where has the rest of our establishment been, like the major media? They're still not, there's no self-examination going on here. The academic community, same thing. So we're in a very, very basic level. On top of that, my own interpretation of why the conversation has opened up. So you have a couple of different perspectives. One is that, which I do not share, which is that this is an op designed from above to roll out a controlled disclosure, kind of like to give the cover up a facelift. There is truth to that, but I think that the reason for this is that we're dealing with a factional struggle within the national security establishment, is my own opinion. So that there have always been individuals who genuinely do believe in some measure of openness and some measure of transparency on the subject. Back in the 1950s till today, it's never really changed. And I just think that this faction has gained a bit more leverage than they've had in the past. Part of that's because of the internet, frankly. And they've just been able to open the space up. They've had some allies in the media, Leslie Kean, Ralph Blumenthal being two key ones there. And so they forced open this space where we can now talk about it. But there is tremendous resistance from within that national security community still. And, we hear about this. We hear about this from members of Congress. I think some of them are genuinely interested in this, and they keep talking about being pressured themselves by forces behind the scenes. We've heard David Grush from almost a year and a half ago now talk about the threats and intimidation and pressure against people like himself and others who are, let's say, whistleblowers, for lack of a better word. So there's a war, a secret war going on, not so secret now, behind the scenes regarding this. And that war involves media. It involves what we can call our official establishment, which you and I are not part of. So we're talking about this, and we're coming at this from a different perspective. So it's really an interesting information space that we're dealing with now. There's still a very strong level of authority and control on this subject by what we can call the establishment. They haven't given up this fight by any means. And there are still significant secrets that are being withheld from us. And the question is, I think, which you started asking, are we at a point where we can turn the corner here? And I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know how far this really is going to go. it is a true situation of the irresistible force against the immovable object. And it's get the popcorn out and let's watch and we'll participate and see how this turns out.
Right. Well, we are participating, and I think the general public could be considered like a third party in this struggle to reveal information because there's clearly a desire, and you and I wouldn't be having this conversation if there wasn't a desire, at least among Watch Mojo's audience, to know more about this subject, which is great, and I'm happy to shed more light on it. Is there any insight on these two factions that are struggling? Like who's involved in each side? What are the motivations for each side? And like you often hear about this internal struggle, but we don't associate a lot of names and faces with them for obvious reasons. But what can you reveal about who's involved in this?
Yeah, when the names come up, they're usually historical names of people who are long dead, and it's we're able to talk about them. But if people alive today, it is trickier. I would say, though, as far as institutions go, you're really looking at pretty much the entire upper level of the U.S. national security community. So the Pentagon leadership, particularly the political appointees, tend to be that way. Now, with Trump's new people, and I think Hegseth is still supposed to be the new Secretary of Defense, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if he's going to be different than some of the others, but what you have had right up until now, even in Trump's first term, where old guard, national security, they were all the same. And particularly if you're talking about political appointees, these are generally not going to be people who are going to rattle or shake the system up in any way. And I think what we've seen when you hear people like whether it's Lou Elizondo or Chris Mellon or David Grush talking, these are people who have worked within that establishment. They all kind of say the same thing too. It's like you've got the higher leadership of all of these organizations are not happy with revealing this information, and particularly those groups that are dealing within the classified world, and are jealous of the information that they have acquired. They're not interested in sharing this. So, but I don't have names any better than anybody else does. I don't know anyone who's actually given up the names of like this person knows, that person doesn't. Um, that's something that we would all like to know, frankly. I would say though that I think it is like we're dealing with a faction. I think that we're with a factional struggle that is, and we're now at a point right now, um, and this is not to make a value judgment on anything about the incoming administration, but when you just look at them objectively and the people that are coming on board, uh, you get a sense that if there was going to be any forward motion on this coming from a presidential administration, this would be an interesting one to watch. One thing about Trump is he's not easy to predict. He's not easy to predict, and he's got RFK Jr. on his staff, on his team, and it is very well known that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is actually very interested in this subject and quite knowledgeable about it, and he's I think quite engaged on it. I suspect that there's a lot of others as well. So, but ultimately, I'm just going to say I don't think that we're going to be looking at any kind of voluntary disclosure. I just don't think so. There's people out there who are making predictions right now that there's about to be an imminent disclosure. I'm not sure what that really means in this context, but there's always going to be new information coming out, and whether or not it's going to be able to move the needle from an official establishment is let me give you an example.
Mhm.
Think about the JFK assassination. All right, so that was over 60 years ago. And pretty much everyone now knows, honestly, that he was killed in a conspiracy.
Mhm.
I mean, who really believes at this point that Lee Harvey Oswald acted as the lone gunman the way that the Warren Commission said so all those years ago? I don't know anyone who sincerely believes that any longer.
Well, at least anybody who is has done some looking into it, because I'm sure
Yeah.
there's plenty of people out there who have no idea still, anything about the situation. But
Sure. But even that's becoming a little difficult because, I mean, the cultural information about this is very widespread. But sure, I'll take your point. But what I'm saying is, it doesn't even matter what we think. The official conclusion from our establishment, from our media, is remains the same. They'll now say, "Well, we're not really 100% sure, but there has been no real reevaluation of that in any depth." So in a sense, the JFK assassination, which was another major turning point of world history, we still don't have official recognition of that, despite the fact that we all kind of sort of know what actually happened. I mean, there's details we may not know, but we have the general idea. And I think it's similar with UFOs, in which we may get to a point where everyone kind of knows, but it still doesn't matter because we don't really have the kind of open democratic the democracy that everyone says we're trying to preserve our democracy. We don't really have that. I don't know what we have, but we don't have that. It's a little more Soviet style. We have a top-down oligarchy or a elite ruling group that manages the media, manages big tech to a very large extent, manages our information space. And I think they've realized that from their point of view, up to a certain point, it may not matter what ordinary people think.
it is starting to feel to me like the public is beginning to adopt that idea of yes, of course, UFOs are real at this point. But what's the next step? Is it
Yeah.
the non-human intelligence element of it that becomes the next version of UFOs? It's like, okay, we know that they're there, but now what's behind it?
Yeah. Well, we need to be there. Uh, we absolutely have to get to a point where we start talking about this because let's just face it, if it's real, and it is real, actually, it's real. Like I one of the my main things that I do every week is I like to visit the National UFO Reporting Center on the web. It's open source. It's just like people writing in their UFO sightings to this website, which has been going for decades. They collect anywhere from 5 to 10,000 raw reports every year. You can just go there and read it. Uh, they're actually great reading for the most part. There's the MUFON database, the Mutual UFO Network. I have access to that, and they have another 5 to 10,000 a year with not a whole lot of overlap. So this is a now that's not to say that all of those cases are aliens. I mean, most of them probably aren't, but I defy anyone to go through these cases 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 and find none that make you just sit back and go, wow, they're in there. There are wow cases in there. So there's something going on. It's around the world. It's involves incredibly advanced technology, for one. We're talking about objects that can hover indefinitely, take off instantly, not make a sound. They're obviously using something better than gasoline or high octane petroleum. So so we need to know what that is. It's important. They're doing something that clearly matters to them. And I think it would behoove us to ask, well, so who are these guys? What are they doing? Do we have anything to be concerned about? That doesn't mean that we have to go fear mongering here, but we want to know what is happening. And that's very difficult because we're dealing with secrecy not simply from our own government. I think that we're dealing with secrecy from these beings. I think they have absolutely no interest in us interfering with whatever it is they are doing here. I think they feel that it's very important for that to be the case. That could be for their safety or it could be for our own.
Right, and it does feel like that's the next question that people are going to start asking. And as you alluded to previously, they've danced around this in the congressional hearings and in interviews. And Lou Elizondo has mentioned non-human intelligence. Dave Grush referred to bodies as non-human biologics. So they use this fancy language to kind of disguise the meaning behind what they're saying. But I think everybody kind of gets the idea that they're talking about aliens. And so it's just
Yeah.
a question of this becoming more widely accepted, I think, before the rhetoric changes a little bit and becomes a little more open and less uh, undercover, well, so to speak.
Well, yeah, the implications of this are really profound, and it's very difficult for us to assimilate all of this. It's a huge thing. It's one thing for us to say, "Oh, wow, aliens are here," but then when you start thinking about it, so like, what if they're not just here? What if they have permanent bases? And what if one of those bases is a half a mile from your house? Because they've got to be somewhere, and there's probably a base that might be a half a mile from someone's house somewhere in the world. Like that's entirely possible. So that makes it a little different. They may not all be at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean or in some mountain that no one can get to. They may have bases or areas of operation right here in our neighborhood. That's entirely possible. And what if it's also discovered that there has been uh, maybe 80 years of communication? Is it possible between some of our government people and them? Is that something that the concerned parties would want to get out? What was the nature of the conversation? What are the nature of these beings? Do they have mastery over space and time? And if so, do they know the future? I mean, I don't really know if any of this is true, but how could it not be possible? We have an extraordinary technology that is demonstrably here, seems to me. So that is indicative of a very advanced, exceptionally advanced, by our standards, society. And they may be able to do a lot of things that we can't do. Space-time manipulation seems to be on the table because, I mean, just think of the description of the Tic Tac UFO by David Fravor from, that was now 20 years ago. He's going down in his FA-18 Super Hornet down to intercept this thing. It comes up and then zips off and is gone past the horizon within 2 seconds. That's at least 10,000 miles per hour, maybe 50,000 miles per hour without making a sound. So we're talking about a type of movement that could involve a manipulation of the very dimensions of our world. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe yes. So they've got capabilities that are off the charts as far as we know. And that's a very, like we sit here thinking, yes, we want some of that. We want that technology. We want all the magic goodies. But now look at it from their point of view. Like you're an alien and you're looking at these humans and you're thinking, yeah, just like 5 generations ago, they were still living in wooden huts, basically, covered wagons. And it wasn't that long ago. You know, we've just arrived. But we like to think, well, we're just so advanced. We're so sophisticated. They're looking at us thinking, yeah, not really. Like we can look at an ancient society, ancient Greece, ancient China, ancient whatever, and we're like, okay, you were not ready to handle this truth. And they probably weren't. Maybe, probably not. But like we are. So from an alien point of view, they might be thinking, we would so easily destabilize your already precarious civilization. Like if we announce ourselves openly, would we save you or would we make things even worse?
Right.
And maybe they care. And if they don't care, if they have a more malign intent, which is also possible, it's entirely possible. We're humans. We think that we don't have malign intent toward other creatures, but ask the other creatures of this planet, they may disagree. So we're like, oh yeah, we just want to make a great, great world for ourselves. Well, okay, what if they're that way? And what if we are a pest from their point of view? Let's face it, we would be a pest from their point of view, very likely. So now that's something that I think we would probably want to know if they take a very cold eye toward humanity, we probably would want to know that that is the case. But it could also be that we are we may not take well the notion that they are actually here, potentially, as some people have said, living and walking among us. Is that possible? So there's a lot going on here. The implications are are vast, and I don't really think that we talk enough about these possibilities of what we're dealing with. There are folks who would say, well, that's all speculative. Yes, it's speculative, and we need to speculate. I don't think we want to get carried away by it, but we do want to think about some of these possibilities because they could be very instrumental in why we're dealing with the secrecy that we are. Just saying.
Playing devil's advocate here a little bit with this question, could you imagine any reasons why we may not want to know the truth about what's going on with the phenomenon? And you mentioned that knowing could be tremendously destabilizing for our society in some ways. Could you imagine any scenario where it would be actually detrimental for us to know the full truth?
Yeah, in theory, sure, I would. Uh, every society needs something to believe in. We need that. And I need that. You do. I'm sure every listener, we want something to believe in that makes our world and our life worthwhile and meaningful. So if it's possible that the reality of this is so dark and so foreboding, and we may look at the situation once we're fully briefed and think there is no hope for us. Like maybe that's the case. I was told by a very senior U.S. government individual many years ago. I've talked about this. Who had a who was active in the government during the Jimmy Carter presidency, so a long time ago, and said to me, I have every reason to believe him. He said that Carter was briefed on this subject back in June of 1977. And this man wasn't present during the briefing, but he knew that when the briefing ended, the door opened and Carter was seen with his head in his hands and his elbows on the table, and he was sobbing or nearly sobbing. He was deeply upset by what he had been told. We can only speculate, but it's not difficult to envision a difficult scenario. They are here. They are uh, they've infiltrated your society. They are going to replace humanity. Whatever. They're going to change your society into a 24/7 global totalitarian digital panopticon where no one has any freedom. Like whatever. Which is what we're looking at. We're moving toward that, aren't we? So, um, but to your question, here's the reason why it might be very difficult for us. What if we learn that there's a way to manipulate space-time dimensions in a way that's destructive to our society? Or what if the energy solutions inherent in UAP technology are also such that you could create a bomb that would destroy half the planet, and that we don't know of a way to contain that technology safely so that some guy, whether in your neighborhood or on the other side of the world, thinks, yeah, we don't need the Pacific Ocean anymore. Let's destroy it. Or we don't need that country anymore. So there are potential capabilities inherent in the technology that, you know, some people will say, well, the technology will be enough to make the deserts bloom and we can create a utopia. Yes, but we're also human beings. There's something about us. We don't all play nice in our sandbox. And so we might make the deserts bloom. We might be able to make things better for ourselves and for the world, and maybe even for the other animal species and plant species that live here with us. But we also might use that technology for the things that we always use it for: power, greed, and living like a god, which everyone probably would love to do, live like the gods. So the question is really, can our species literally be trusted with this type of power? I don't really know.
I would
I used to
imagine.
always reflexively say, yes, we can be. We're good. Well, I don't know. I'll take a pass.
I mean, it's the yin and yang, right? There's good and evil in all things, I think. And I'm just imagining, another another race looking down on us and all of the war and inequality that we have in the world, the suffering and pain that people go through, and thinking they're not ready yet probably for a lot of this stuff. They should get their ducks in a row before we can hand them down anything that would, as you say, possibly provide the means to develop a utopia, but also could be incredibly destructive if used the wrong way. I know that there's historically been a lot of activity over military installations and even nuclear installations, which continues
Yeah.
to this day, I'm hearing. And it kind of feels like, a parent watching over their children playing with matches and kind of like taking it away and saying, no, you're going to hurt yourself with that. Do you get that feeling as well?
Sometimes I've just completed a 3 volume, oh my God, 3 volume study of USOs, so unidentified submerged objects, so water-based UFOs. Think of it that way. I'm about to publish the first of those volumes, I think within a month, and the other two will be out in the first half of this year, I think. And one thing that strikes me in looking at these, I've got about 700 cases historically that I've uh, tried to breathe life into. They've been completely forgotten, almost totally by researchers. A lot of them are military encounters. A lot of them involve U.S. military, U.S. Navy, often aircraft carriers or battle cruisers. And also the old Soviet Navy has a number of these cases. And what you find is there seems to be a definite interest in nuclear powered craft, like nuclear aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines. They are they seem to be very interested in what we are doing in a lot of respects. Uh, there's definitely, for the most part, a hands-off attitude, but one of interest and observation. On occasion, there is electromagnetic interference that they have been able to exert on our battleships and aircraft carriers. I mean, there are cases where from 1971, the USS John F. Kennedy aircraft carrier, nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed aircraft carrier, had was disabled for about a half hour north of the Caribbean by a glowing spherical orb-like thing that may have come out of the water. It was hovering low, and it just shut them down. There's a number of these types of cases. So they they follow us. They're interested in us. If you're them and you're watching our development, especially through the course of the 20th century, I mean, our first submarine happened in the year 1900. Before that, there were no submarines, practical submarines. Um, so they're looking at us thinking, these humans just don't stop. We spread our tentacles throughout the oceans and throughout the world. We didn't have satellites until the 1950s, and now we've blanketed the world with them. We have our eyes and ears and metallic muscle that has blanketed the globe in the space of basically a century or so. So they're watching us. They've got to find that very interesting, I think. And I think it's caused them probably to adapt their own methods for watching us as well. This is what it looks like to me. So I think they're interested, and whether they're worried, whether this is all predictable to them, I don't know. But I think we are. I think humanity right now is probably the place to be in this quadrant of the galaxy, in the sense of here is a new civilization that is just on the verge of leaping into the world of all of these other intelligent species. Like we're very close now. In just a couple of generations, we've developed, think about it, radio, flight, nuclear weapons, missiles, computers, artificial intelligence, smartphones. We're moving toward AGI, or maybe the singularity. I still like using that word. And nanotech and advanced genetic manipulation. I mean, all in the snap of a finger. So we're transforming into something completely different right now. it seems to me. And I think they must be aware of that. And I suspect that that's bringing in the neighborhood to have a good look-see at what we're up to.
This could be a good segue into the ongoing drone mystery that we've been dealing with for going on 2 months now, I think.
Hmm.
Can you give a brief rundown just for anybody who might not be as familiar with this? Like, how did this all start with the drone sightings? It originated in and around New Jersey, and now it's like spreading across the entire East Coast, it seems, with no real explanation given. What is this all about, and what's your assessment of the
Yeah.
situation?
Yeah, this is very interesting. Well, a couple of things. So when we say the mystery began at a certain point, what we have to say is that publicity about this mystery began at a certain time. So we started getting a lot of publicity from New Jersey in mid-November, and actually from other places, the United Kingdom. Uh, there was some information about, we'll call them drones. I call them mystery drones because are they really all drones? So these mystery drones over a couple of bases in the United Kingdom around the same time, possibly even earlier. New Jersey, New York City area, really the Northeastern seaboard area is, I mean, down to Virginia. People have been noting and recording, and we can find them all on social media, all of these videos of some of them very interesting. Some of them look like absolutely look like drones, flashing red lights or whatever, and some of them don't look like drones. And so now we're asking ourselves, well, are some of these videos are they fake? Some might be fake. Some are probably totally legit. So there's a lot of confusion there. But what uh, I would say is that there, what we're calling drones can very easily be non-drones. We're getting reports, for example, of these objects coming from the ocean, from the Atlantic Ocean over land. Now, there have been claims, and I don't know that they've been completely substantiated, that they were seen coming out, literally out of the water. I've heard that at least once, of several times that they're coming from a source in the ocean. Okay, so I think we can probably say that seems to be true. Over US locations in large numbers, they are they're some of them are much larger than what we think of as drones. We're here the size of a minivan or a large automobile. That's very large for a drone. The fact that they can loiter or hover for a very long period of time, 5, 6 hours apparently, that's extremely unusual for any commercial drone. It's not out of the question for military type drones, for some of them. And keep in mind with the war going on in Ukraine, drone technology has been going through like a kind of revolution, the way aircraft went through in the First World War, and then again in the Second World War. Warfare has a way of doing that. So drone technology is becoming very advanced now. But then the question is, have all of those technology advancements made it across the Atlantic that quickly, that immediately, so that they're being employed here? And also, a lot of the behaviors of these drones strike me as kind of advanced, even for what you're seeing in Ukraine, frankly. It strikes me as that way. So we don't really know what these things are. What we do know is that in the long history of UFO sightings, going back decades and decades, these types of things have been reported. A lot of this is in line with traditional UFO sighting waves. For example, one that I think has been overlooked, is very important, went back into 1975, almost 50 years ago now, across the entire United States northern border from Maine going all the way out to Montana in the fall of that year were a series of utterly awe-inspiring, low, hovering, silent UFOs that were hovering over nuclear armed bases in the United States repeatedly without being in any way molested by US military. in the least. In one case, over what was then Wart Smith Air Force Base in Michigan, there was a low hovering object seen over the base, ultra quiet, just sitting there. An aircraft was coming in to land. It was vectored in uh, to investigate this object. The object started going south down Lake Michigan. The aircraft pursued it for a long time. And this object just played cat and mouse games and ended up taking off. According to the men on the craft, they gave a report to the base historian. They said the thing took off at more than 1,000 knots, over 1,000 miles per hour, where it had been hovering just a little while ago. So that's a really extraordinary kind of capability. We have nothing in the inventory in 1975, and I don't even think today that can hover as well as go at more than 1,000 miles per hour, and especially without making any noise. And there's a lot of other strange things about that sighting that I'll leave out. Like at times it seemed to divide into two craft and then become one, and who the hell knows what that was. So that's one of those cases from 50 years ago. There's a lot of that going back to the 1940s and 50s. And we're really at a loss. So the current drone mystery, I think it would be a mistake to see it separate from the long history of these more traditional UFO encounters, because there's a lot of it that seems to be consistent. So if that's the case, and I think it is the case with some of these drone encounters, they don't seem like just ordinary drones. I ask myself, is this part of the long-standing UFO UAP mystery? And I think the answer is probably yes, especially when a lot of these are described as orbs. And I'm very glad that orbs are getting a little more attention these days, because that is a really important part of this phenomenon. They're not all flying saucers that look like disc-shaped objects. Some of them are totally spherical. They glow. Is it that they glow because they're just a ball of plasma that's somehow intelligent, or do they glow because there's actually a solid craft inside that's glowing because that's the nature of its ionization field, and it just does that? I think it's probably the latter, but it could be both. So there's just a lot of really interesting questions here. In other words, I guess I don't think that this is all just human-derived technology. I
Donald
just don't think so.
Donald Trump has claimed that one of his first orders of business after the inauguration will be to release a report about the drones. Do you see that as having any potential to reveal a notable truth, or is it going to be one of these heavily redacted reports that we've seen time and again? Or perhaps, you know, perhaps he won't follow through with it in the way that he has expressed. What do you think will happen?
I think there's potential that we learn something. I do. Uh, I think there's some potential for that. However, is it going to be able to do the whole miss? Trump, look, he has a habit of overpromising. He's promised that he can end the Ukraine war the day he comes in. That's not going to happen. It's good that he'll talk to the Russians. I think that's all wonderful. But whether that's going to mean that he can solve this, that's all totally different matter. I don't think that he can. And the same here. Like, it's easy to say, yes, I'm going to release a report. Well, I think it would be a very good thing to have the federal government be more forthcoming than it has been. The federal government has not been forthcoming at all on this. And we know this because every single state official that has spoken to the feds up till now has said they are hiding information, they're not being truthful, they're not being forthcoming. So anything would be better than what we're getting right now. As far as we're really looking at a couple of possibilities here. So we had the Cybertruck bomber manifesto, Matthew Livelsberger, saying that he had information that these drones are using anti-gravitic technology, and that the Chinese are behind it, and that they are launching these anti-grav devices from submarines in the Atlantic Ocean, and that this is a great danger to national security. I wouldn't say that's impossible, but that strikes me as unlikely that the Chinese engage in provocations on that level. That is not historically the Chinese way, and I just don't think that they're doing it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Livelsberger, maybe he's right. But that's one possibility. Another possibility is that it's some other nation that's not friendly to the US, but you don't really have many possibilities here because it's very advanced tech. The Russians are busy in their own war right now. Are they really going to have time to play games over US airspace like this? I'm doubtful. Another possibility is that it's a US black op of some sort. Would Trump's report or the report from his team express that? I'm doubtful that they would do that. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe because it's the previous administration and he's got no skin in the game, and maybe he could do that. But I'm somehow doubtful. So I don't, I wouldn't want to be in his position right now to have to uh, follow through with this promise because it may be very difficult.
Do you
It may
have
be very
any
difficult to satisfy the public with whatever this report has to say.
Right. Do you have any longer term expectations for what the Trump administration might reveal over the next couple of years? It seems like a very different situation from his first term, and he's got a lot of people in place that seem to have a vested interest in this. You mentioned Robert Kennedy Jr. before our call, seems to have a special interest in UAP. Elon Musk, obviously very
Yeah.
involved in space, development, SpaceX, and he's been very quiet when it comes to anything regarding UFOs, hasn't really alluded to anything, but one would assume that if anybody's got information, it would be him. So, what are your expectations for the coming years and what might be revealed, particularly by this administration and the people that are involved in it?
Yeah, Musk has expressed a lot of skepticism about UFOs for a long time on multiple occasions. He doesn't seem to believe that it's real. In fact, he said, "Look, I've got all of my satellites out there. We would have seen them." I guess um, maybe. I don't know if his technology is as good as theirs, but okay. Uh, but I think Trump has a more interesting team for sure than what he had the first time he came in. First time he came in, uh, he said he was going to drain the swamp, and he brought the swamp with him. They all came with him on his staff. I mean, he had people like Bolton on his national security team. I mean, uh, so I think it's a little more of an interesting team now, where you've got Tulsi Gabbard, if she can really be helpful, RFK, Musk. If nothing else, these are interesting people who are, at least from the past, they've been known as independent thinkers. So that's interesting. They're not long-standing politicos who are identified as swamp beasts. They're all interesting people, smart people. Yeah, I think that there's a definite possibility there for sure. I wouldn't necessarily bet a lot of money that there's going to be a significant UFO disclosure, but certainly a much higher percentage chance than I think the establishment type administrations that we've typically had, whether Republican or Democrat in the past, whether Biden or Obama or George W. Bush, for that matter, are all kind of the same to me. So I think, Trump is a bit of a wild card. He knows that he's got a lot of enemies within the DC establishment. The entire neocon establishment hates him. They despise him. So he knows he's got enemies, and whether that means he's going to cooperate to keep them off his back or to take them on in some kind of battle remains to be seen. I don't know that any of those options is really a sure thing at this point. So I'm waiting, I'm watching, and I would expect more surprises from him than in a previous administration, certainly than the Biden one. But we're dealing with a very difficult subject here that's it's difficult in every way. It's difficult philosophically, existentially, for us to actually grasp the enormity of. But it's also difficult from a structural perspective. That is, the institutions of our society. America is a declining superpower. That's the reality. And when you are dealing with a superpower that is no longer able to have unipolar domination of the world, and this is quite obvious that that is the case now, there's always the danger that declining power can do something reckless and dangerous. And um, will I don't know. I don't know. This is a tough one. I do think one thing is possible here. When you're in a situation of political instability, which we are in, and we will be in, I think, for more than the next 4 years. I think it's structural at this point. Just because of the grand transformations going on in the world, the US political system will be unstable for a while. In that type of a situation, I would expect leaks, unsettling leaks to happen. And 15 years ago, I co-authored a book on disclosure, and we made some predictions, some of which were true, some of which were not true. So the biggest one that was not true is that I believed that if a UFO disclosure were to happen, it would happen like fast. It would be an acknowledgement, and then boom, the world changes within the space of a week. Well, that's certainly not what we're looking at. We're seeing a very slow motion kind of game being played out here. But we still haven't seen the landslide. There's still a potential for a significant landslide, powerful type information to come out that shocks the world that we cannot ignore. Something along the lines of, yeah, we've actually had alien tech, a genuine admission. Yeah, there are alien beings. Some of them are alive and they're here. It's not impossible that that will happen. I don't know that that will happen as a planned disclosure, but it could happen as a result of a leak that becomes too compelling to ignore, in which the whatever administration is in power at that time decides we should get out ahead of this and control this narrative as best we can. So we need to make some admissions. I could imagine that.
I would imagine that, there being so much distrust in government at this point, if there was such an admission, a large percentage of people probably
Yeah,
wouldn't even believe it.
absolutely. Totally agree with you. When we wrote After Disclosure, it was in 2010. That feels like 1,000 years ago. I mean, I even thought back then, that was Obama was president, and as distrustful as I've always been a conspiracy theorist. Like I gladly will take that label. I have no problem with that. I'm not ashamed of it. I believe in conspiracies. But even back in 2010, I thought if a United States president makes an official announcement, people are going to be inclined to believe it. That's what I thought in 2010. And we've just gone through so much since then. I think it would be very problematic for any president. Trump, but if Biden were to make it, I think it would be considered very problematic as well. Or any person after Trump to make it, I think would be considered problematic. So we've become a very fractured society. This is another thing about disclosure, by the way, which I'm kind of glad you opened the door for this. Our world has transformed so dramatically. We now mostly live in front of our screens in virtual worlds, virtual information bubbles. Whereas when I was a kid, people would literally turn on the TV. There weren't even remotes. You pull the button and you have to wait a second for the TV to come on, and then you watch the news, and everyone would watch the same news. So there's obviously a great opportunity for public mind control in that situation. But the upside was we were all basically having the same conversation with each other. that's not really so much the case anymore. So we're all living in our own little silos. Half the population despises or disbelieves the other half. And within that, there's all of these other little mini silos. So how a disclosure can even happen, it's we're all in unexplored territory here, socially, culturally. When I was thinking about this years ago, writing a book, a lot of those assumptions, I don't really know that they apply today. We're in a very different place. What we really want to understand is what is the nature of Western culture and global culture moving forward? What actually is the kind of society that we even have, and how would disclosure affect that? A world in which an artificial algorithm manages your news feed, increasingly designed to extract maximum amount of money out of your bank account. How will disclosure affect all of these things? I don't really know that we really understand our own world currently, much less how a disclosure will affect that world and what it will become as a result of that. We're mired in all kinds of illusions about ourselves and about our society and about these other beings. And we think, well, yes, we just need disclosure. We need the truth. Yes, we do. We want the truth, but obtaining it is not always as easy as we want. I've looked at this subject for over 30 years, and I've been very lucky in the sense that I've been able to work for myself and work kind of like a fanatic on understanding the UFO mystery. Plus, um, I had at least a decent background in global history, world politics to start with, which was a help for me. And I've maintained an interest in the long, long history of our species. Like I'm into it. I'm able to devote myself to this subject in a way that my friends and relatives and family members can't. And it's still hard for me. Like it's still difficult mastering this immensity of a subject. So uh, I'm not trying to sound as if it's impossible for us to make headway here. It isn't. Uh, and we are making headway. You started this conversation off asking, are we turning a corner since 2017? And as difficult as this subject is, as challenging as it is, we have turned a corner. And, there are times in life where failure seems like an absolute certainty, like where you have a 1% chance of success. But I will tell you, I've seen this in my own life. If if you've got a game plan and if you just work your tail off to achieve that 1% possibility, you can get it. You can actually do it. You've got to be focused and you've got to work hard and you have to not give up. But even very difficult scenarios can happen if you really apply yourself. And this subject is a case in point. We have the chance of gaining self-understanding. But here's the thing. Here's another scenario, because I love to speculate about this. So what if these beings have an IQ of like 500 plus, like they're orders of magnitude beyond us, and they're telepathic, so they can crawl inside your mind, and they're part of their own hive mind, so that they have instant access to a complete like encyclopedia, the Galactica encyclopedia of information. And they have an emotional disposition that makes it so that maybe they don't laugh at all of your jokes. And they look at you and they can see your naked soul before them. So does it matter if they look human or not if you're sitting in a room across from one of them and they're just staring at you? Well, that would be very intimidating, I think. And that doesn't strike me as impossible a scenario. So if they are like that, we are going to have to find our own center of being. I mean, some people might think this sounds very wishy-washy, but I've really come to believe that it is probably essential that for us to deal with them, we need we need to have a very much better understanding of ourselves. For example, think of the kind of society that we create. Constant stimulation, constant screen attachment, screen addiction, waiting for the notifications, bing, 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 the endorphins. Uh, and we're constantly chasing after whatever we're chasing in this world of ours, like the hamster wheel that you never get off of. That's the world for many of us. That is not a society conducive to self-examination and self-exploration when you are dealing with a series of intelligences that are probably leaps and bounds beyond our operational capacity to begin with. So if we're going actually to deal with them in any way that's meaningful, we probably need to just stop and engage in some seriously deep self-reflection about what we are. And then maybe that means spirituality. Like it probably does, to be honest. And the kind of system that we've developed in our world, I don't, I just at this point in my life, I don't think is all that conducive to us being able to effectively psychologically relate to these other beings.
That brings up a very good point about spirituality because I feel like I agree with you in that we should do our own work to develop our own sense of spirituality to prepare us for some sort of revelation, like the existence of other beings. But at the same time, their presence would shift the ground beneath us and force us to develop even further our understanding of ourselves and spirituality even.
Mhm.
What I mean, there it's
Yeah,
probably a mix of both, right? Like we
exactly.
would have
They could
to
kickstart something, right?
they could kickstart like, even further transformation, I would imagine, and that would shake because the world is still the religious institutions still have power in our world, and it's not just in the Vatican or whatever, but like there is a presence that pervades even government and how we still sing God Bless America and everything. You know, it hasn't gone away with all of the technological advancements. There still is a religious undertone in many of the things that we do. And I'm curious what you think a reveal like non-human intelligence, aliens, extraterrestrials, whatever, how would that fundamentally change that aspect of our societies?
Well, I want to answer that or I want to deal with that, but I just would like to say that despite all of my skepticism about our capabilities as a species and our the illusions that we seem to be mired in, I really do believe in the value of knowing the truth and having the truth out publicly for us. If there's any one thing that I'm going to put my faith in, it's in that we need to be able to understand the truth so that we can react in a realistic fashion toward whatever we're dealing with. I'd rather us be realistic rather than mired in utopian ideas about what we think the situation is. So now your question was interesting, and could you rephrase it just
Basically,
quickly?
just about how important religion still is
Oh yeah,
throughout our society, and how non-human intelligence presence would
yeah.
change that potentially.
Well, it's interesting. I've had a lifelong argument and debate and discussion about religion probably since I was a child, and I still do. I'm 62 now, and I haven't stopped thinking about it. My opinion at this point is that religion was probably and remains the single most valuable social glue that you can have in any kind of social body, regardless of its truth value. Um, for human beings to exist in a highly organized fashion, you, I mean, other than anything more than like 10 people living together, hunting and gathering by themselves, where maybe they can have a more organic sense of community. But if you're going to have 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 people or 1,000,000,000 people or more organized in a manner that creates economic power and technological advancement and things like that, well, you're going to need some way for people not to be at each other's throats and to agree on certain social truths just so that we can get along. And religion is probably like the easiest way to do that. And the fact that what you see in Western society is the dissolution, really, of formal religions. And some people are all for that, and others are against that. But what you definitely see is a kind of breaking apart of the things that formally knitted us together as a society. I tend to think that human beings are, by our nature, we are social creatures. We need, there's a deep, deep sense that we want of being part of a larger community. Religion just does that. Religion provides that. Also, uh, as someone who believes, I do believe in a kind of an intelligence that pervades reality. Call it God. That's my personal opinion. So that a religion can bring one to a relationship with that intelligence, which I think is probably a positive thing. Becomes a problem when you turn it into when you become a zealot. I don't care if a zealot's of any kind, but and religions can breed zealotry very easily. So there's the problem with that. So your question, the truth of an ET reality, let's just say, on our world religions, I think they certainly would be deeply affected by it. I think it would be impossible for them not to be. They could adapt, they would change. You look at something like Christianity, which is there's been many, many versions of Christianity over 2,000 years. Many types, many variations of that belief. And it's not the same today that it was in the first century AD. So presumably that would transform as well. And that could be something very different in the future. I don't know if would an alien presence cause the dissolution of not just religion, but just our beliefs in what we are, our understanding of reality. Yes, I think it could transform a lot of that. And whether I want to put a valuation on it or not, I don't know. I often think we go through our lives thinking, this is good, that's bad. I support this. Let's do this policy, and let's not do that policy, as if we have a whole lot of control over this matter. I don't really know that I believe that. I've got two favorite writers. They're both Russian. Tolstoy and Dostoevsky are my two guys. If you read Tolstoy, if you read War and Peace, which to me is just one of the most incredible works of genius that the human mind can create. Tolstoy is a man who really had the ability to crawl inside the minds of hundreds of people and know them probably better than they knew themselves, and then to write them out in literary format. He was incredible. So what Tolstoy also had, though, was a philosophy of volition and of free will. And I think what he believed, because, in War and Peace, one of his characters is Napoleon Bonaparte, a man of incredible genius and capability who stood literally really above everyone else of his time. Napoleon would have been a genius at anything he undertook. And yet Napoleon himself was not the master, but the tool of greater historical forces that he, in Tolstoy's opinion, was not really able to control. That's Tolstoy's interpretation. And I think I agree with that. I think that we tend to think that we've got this ability to master our destiny, to control our fate. And I'm not so sure. I think what I believe, whether it's good or bad, about what is happening to our species, this impending, and at some point there will be an acknowledgement of the reality of these beings. I think it's inevitable. Like I've come to understand it really doesn't matter what I think is a good thing or a bad thing. It's going to happen. One of the things that's happening is that we are going through a transformation of our species in a very fundamental way. I've talked with a number of people about this. Some don't agree with me, but others do. I call it the fourth stage of humanity. And you think of it this way, in terms of our social fundamental organization, we go from hunting and gathering for hundreds of thousands, really millions of years. Since Homo erectus, essentially 2 million years ago, we started hunting and gathering and organizing our lives around that. And then only about 10 or 15,000 years ago, we start discovering sedentary agriculture and domestication of animals, which radically transformed how we organize ourselves as a society. And that we can call that stage two of humanity, the agricultural phase. And that gave us civilization. It gave us writing. It gave us the wheel. It gave us metallurgy. It gave us the Roman Empire and all of these other cool things in our world. And then we go to stage three, where we really discover science and advanced technology, the Industrial Revolution, roughly starting about 300 years ago. And that fundamentally transformed human society again. Did we have any control over that? No, we just naturally got into it. It just happened. And now we're looking at a fourth, I think, stage where you have the confluence of the digitalization of our world, essentially with artificial intelligence, and the digital information explosion, which is causing our world to go through a completely different transformation, in my view, that we have no control over. 30 years ago, people were talking about artificial intelligence back then too. There was a guy named Bill Joy, who was a co-founder of, I think, Sun Microsystem. He was one of the leaders at the time in computer tech, and he said, "People, this is in the early '90s. We have got to stop this artificial intelligence. It's going to transform our world and destroy human society." And people back then were looking at him like, dude, what are you smoking? What do you think? Do you really think it's possible to stop this? We all understood it was impossible. We can't we can't control this. If we were to try to stop our run toward AI, well, we know that there's the Chinese, there's the Russians, there's every other country in the world, there's other corporations. If you don't do it, genetic enhancement of humanity. Every mother and dad's going to want their kid to have the best genetics, and they will look into gene therapy because got to get my kid into whatever career path I want them to get onto. And so there's going to be this inevitability of this transformation. We can't stop this. We don't have control over this. So fast forward to ET. We are becoming a different kind of society. And it's not 100% clear, to me, how could it be, to know exactly all the contours of that society, what it will actually entail. It will probably entail a lot of centralization, a lot of micromanagement of the human species, despite whatever populist reactions we're looking at currently, of which the election of Trump was part of reflection of that. But my take is that that's just going to be a bump in the road in the long run. We're moving toward a very centralized kind of a system, kind of like an intelligent ant colony of micromanaged human beings. And that's the society that will have to deal with ET disclosure, it seems to me, because we're moving very rapidly toward that. So the kinds of ideas that we currently have, or people in the 1950s, I think we have the same ideas that they had in the 50s. Back then, there were UFO researchers like Donald Kehoe, one of my heroes. I love Donald Kehoe. I've read all of his books, and he believed in disclosure. Didn't use that word, but back in the 50s and 60s, Kehoe was all about it. Got to get congressional hearings. Got to get the truth out because we live in a democracy, and the people have a right to know and get the truth out and progress and all of this stuff. Well, that's not the world we're going to be having disclosure in. We're moving into something very different. I don't know what it is, but it's not that world. So I say, look, I start to feel more and more like George Carlin did at the end of his life. He became a crusty old bastard, but he was onto something. Carlin would say, "Well, I just got a front row seat to the show, and I'm just grabbing the popcorn. I'm watching it. I'm not quite there yet. I don't feel that disenchanted. But I do think that our a level of control over this situation, we tend to think more that we have more control than we probably do. But the thing is, um, this truth will come out. It's going to come out. It's impossible not to. It's impossible not to. It's we can't help ourselves. That's why 2017 happened. We couldn't help ourselves. We developed an internet. It took a couple of decades to get critical mass. But why did those New York Times articles happen? Ask yourself. It's because we'd had basically 20 plus years of powerful conversations developing on this subject where researchers could share all kinds of information much more easily with each other. And it just built and a lot of pressure from below. Leslie Kane, who I know, and Ralph Blumenthal, I know Ralph too. These are people who it was inevitable that someone with a connection to an established media source would decide to take this issue on. And, I think we're lucky that they did, but it was also inevitable. Someone was going to do it. It was an inevitability, I think. So that we're now we're going to continue that. More leaks will happen. Stephen Greer is now talking about his certainty that within a week or so, there's going to be some major disclosure from some insider. And I listen to predictions like that, and I usually have a kind of a cold eye toward predictions and the people who make them. I'm not a big fan. However, certainly not impossible that he could be right. He might know something. And if it doesn't happen this time, it could happen the next time. There's always now the pot is now at a low boil. And I don't think it's going to be very easy to dial the clock back. So
We
we're on a path.
we speak a lot about whether humanity is ready for acknowledgement of an ET presence, but all of this talk about the rapid technological development that we've undergone in a very short period of time, do you think that humanity is even ready for the stage that we've come to right now at this point?
No, no, we're not. We're doing great damage to ourselves. I mean, look at the massive rise of things like mental illness and all kinds of social maladaptions that are going on all around in our society. We are clearly not ready for the transformations that are happening all around us. But not being ready for something has never prevented it from happening. No, no, as I like to say, no one's ever ready for their first child, but it happens. You're going to have that kid, and then you have to fly by the seat of your pants, as it were, and you learn to be a parent and you do things right and you do things wrong, and that's just the way it is. And we're not ready, we'll never be ready for a true disclosure because this reality is, I tend to think, is probably awe-inspiring and deeply profound. But it will happen. We won't be ready, but we'll have to deal with it anyway. The transformation of our society, we're absolutely not ready for it. We're but it doesn't, but we ask ourselves, like, how can we change it? How do you prevent smartphone addiction? No one's figured that one out. And no one's figured out how to, like, How to prevent an entire new generation of people becoming completely addicted to TikTok? I don't know. No one's figured that one out. Ban TikTok? Yeah, let's see how far that goes. No one believes that that's going to work.
Yeah,
It's
integration seems to be the issue. There's people who will go live out in the wilderness and can get away with it still, avoiding most forms of technology. But if you want to be a part of society and function within the systems that we've built, it's very difficult to manage, living like everybody else, but also keeping that state of mind, avoiding those negative aspects of it, the mental health troubles and whatnot. It's a very delicate balancing act, and a lot of people are turning to, YouTube videos and, self-help experts and things like that. Like there's a growing community of those people trying to find better ways to live. I've noticed this, and it seems to speak to the points that you've just made.
Well, I'll tell you something that I don't know that I've mentioned, but I don't use a smartphone. I gave it up several years ago, and I have an old terrible phone. But of course, my wife has hers, and but but the problem is that the smartphone is such, for me, a horrible distraction. It was becoming really unhealthy, and so I'm not using one. So it causes a lot of inconveniences. I mean, I've used my computer. I can still I'll still message people through my computer, but not on a phone. And there's a certain difference to me psychologically for that. So I try myself to keep the technology avalanche at somehow out of my life. At night after dinner time, personally, I do everything possible to shut out the entire world, including UFO stuff or anything. I wall off the world, and I think that's been good for me. I think it's been helpful. It makes it frustrating for some people to try to reach me, but I mean, I'm sorry. It made it hard for you to try to reach me. You tried reaching me, I think, a month or two ago,
Oh,
and
well,
I
I
was
reached out to you through your website by email, but we got connected anyway. It worked out.
well. I have a wife who runs. I think she falls on her sword for me in many ways to keep up. So I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, I think for my own mental health, I I will like to go out for walks outside, and I will not have a phone with me. I will not have it with me. I will drive to the store. I will not carry my phone. I like to be present as much as I can with wherever I am. It's hard enough with the world that we have. Our world is so fractured, but I try to do what little I can to maintain my own sanity in this world. It's
And
hard. It's very hard.
it is, you know, speaking of distractions, and this is one of the last major questions that I have for you because I'm very conscious of your time. We've already, it's been over an hour, but
I'm enjoying talking with you. It's
oh,
great.
as am I. I could go on forever, but I'm very fascinated by, this whole discussion about technology. A lot of it's been foreshadowed in science fiction and pop culture. My job involves being very aware of what's going on in pop culture. Um, it's a very important part of everyday life for a lot of people, for better or worse. That said, I would like to know your take on how pop culture, movies, TV, books, etc., has shaped people's views of UFOs and aliens over the years because we've had decades and decades of UFO movies to draw from, Star Wars, Star Trek, what have you. It's had to have made a deep
Mhm.
psychological impact on people. Is it to our benefit or our detriment? I don't know. I would like to know your opinion on that.
Yeah, well, I think we do a dance with these aliens. So by that I mean we're looking at them while they're looking at us. And so when we started with movies of this theme. To some extent, this theme preceded our knowledge of flying saucers. I mean, there was the Buck Rogers comics of the 1930s. Actually, it started in the late 20s. They're amazing. I have a collection of Buck Rogers. They're awesome. Um, where he's out there and eventually meeting people from another planet, this type of thing. So we've had this fascination with other worlds, at least since H.G. Wells, and at least since we've been flying. But definitely since the age of the 1940s, our movies have reflected our understanding of this phenomenon. The Day the Earth Stood Still is actually still kind of a classic study of that attitude from 1953. So what you see in there's two things to say about it. One is our natural cultural reactions, and the other is what has been manipulated by the intelligence community and their relationship to Hollywood and any kind of messaging that they are trying to convey through that. It seems to me that there probably is a lot of the latter, although finding exact examples of it are hard. Steven Spielberg, who did Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is a really fine movie about UFOs, actually, and stated that he had been under pressure that the CIA wanted to have influence over that movie and that he fought that and didn't allow it. What you see is that over many, many decades, our understanding and our portrayal of this phenomenon have become marginally more sophisticated. Marginally. But we're still like, what movies, other than really that Spielberg movie from almost 50 years ago, actually portray gray aliens doing abductions of humans? Hollywood really avoids that. What Hollywood movie? I mean, we have little hints here and there. Men in Black had a scene where I mean, it's a great movie, and there's that one scene where it's like Grand Central Station of all these different aliens hanging out and coming and going. Uh, does something like that actually exist? Could be. That could actually, something like that is not impossible. We've had some pretty interesting remote viewers. That's a whole other thing I'm totally fascinated by, who believe that that is maybe a non-humorous version of that actually exists. But to your larger point, I think that our popular cultural treatment of this subject has increasingly reflected an ever greater awareness of the complexity. Think of a show like The X-Files from, 30 years ago. People can say, well, it's just a Hollywood or, a film treatment of this. But I actually think that there's some really good ideas that are in there and some very sophisticated ideas in that show. So I think that we're engaging a process of trying to understand them through this visual means of cinema. And sometimes we get it and sometimes we don't. And I don't know how much I can really say about this that's worthwhile. I mean, we're reacting to them in all of the different ways that we can. And I think slowly we are acculturating ourselves to them. The last thing I guess I would say on this is when you look at attitudes and depictions of them from the 1950s, so you think of something like The Day the Earth Stood Still. That's actually a really great movie, but you've got a very human-looking alien and he's got a robot. And he speaks English and he's understandable and he's got a message. Don't destroy yourselves. So it's a very human message and very understandable to the world of the 1950s. There's no space-time manipulation in that movie because people didn't really think about that type of thing. There's no high strangeness that is in that movie because, again, the culture of that time wasn't, they were not ready psychologically to deal with high strangeness. I don't think so. It took generations for UFO researchers to start accepting some of those strange things, um, let alone the general public. So there's a series of steps I think that we have to go through to get into the deeper waters of this phenomenon. They're very deep waters. And I think, the portrayals that we've seen in popular culture, our reactions to this are getting us there by degrees. I think it takes a number of generations for us to fully grasp what exactly we're dealing with here.
There's probably also a desensitizing factor in kind of mitigating the shock of some of the reveals that we've even gotten between 2017 and now. I mean, it's not so like you look at some of the footage of the craft and stuff like that that they've declassified, and perhaps in the 50s or 60s, that if the public had seen that, it would have been tremendously shocking. But now, in the world of 4K and everything looks like, a Hollywood blockbuster, seeing images like that isn't really all that impressive. And you're like, oh, okay. I mean, if the implications mean that
Mhm.
that's ETs, like visually speaking, it's not as striking as it would have otherwise been had we not been so
Yeah,
desensitized by everything that we have around us.
yeah, I completely agree with that. We have gone through such a dramatic revolution technologically and culturally since the time of our grandparents. We sometimes forget just how dramatic a change it's been and continues to be. So I mean, every new generation for the last couple of centuries, the new generation has been kind of more, let's say progressive. That's a very loaded word, than the previous generation, but that is speeding up ever more. So we're going through a lot of changes, psychological and intellectual changes that, again, are going to create a very different kind of society, even in one more generation from now, 20, let alone 40, 50 years from now. I don't know how to even think about the world from 50 years from now. Um, it's going to be, I think, a very different kind of a world. And that's the world that's going to have to live probably with the knowledge of what we are now just trying to figure out.
With all of this said, is there any room for optimism about the future? Because these are very heavy topics, and they
Mhm.
leave a lot of feelings of doubt and of fear for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I think that we should leave room for optimism and the potential to advance in positive ways.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, think of it this way. Uh, our species has dealt with almost nothing but catastrophe since we started. We have dealt with injustice. We've dealt with uh, massive suffering, death, hopelessness, destruction of entire cities and civilizations over and over again. And we keep coming back. We haven't given up. We are extremely adaptable as a species. It's really our secret sauce, as it were. We're able to adapt to all kinds of situations. There may be limits to that adaptation, but we are quite resilient. So I don't think we're going to go away. I think that we will be around for a long time. I don't think that we're going to head toward an extinction event. I mean, we do have an unstable infrastructure, but even if that infrastructure were to become untenable for a while, we're not all going to die. Where there may be suffering, but it's not the end of the world. We can get through it. We're a lot stronger than we realize. We are a resilient species. The other thing that I keep in mind is uh, we are whatever happens to each of us individually. I mean, first of all, at a certain point in the grand scheme of things, this physical body that we inhabit is going to be gone. They all end the same way. Whether it's 20 years or 80 years, the human life is a very short thing in the grand scheme of things. So let's just keep that in mind. We're not immortal. And despite the hopes of transhumanists, we will probably not achieve an immortality. I don't think that's realistic or possible, frankly. That's my opinion. So we're all going to die, no matter what happens. And that's okay, because that is the way that this existence of ours is designed. We're all, as I see it, little tentacles in the mind of God. When this body of mine goes away, I believe that there will be a consciousness of some sort, and maybe like a drop of water emerging back into an ocean, my consciousness will then merge with that universal consciousness. That's what I think. Um, and that's fine. That's great. There will be another manifestation, maybe some other variation of that God consciousness, that part of what constitutes myself will be part of something else. Who knows? I don't know how it works. But ultimately, we're involved in a very, very great mystery of existence, not just our little theater on this planet, which if you expand we are, then there's our galaxy. But our galaxy is just a tiny little speck in the vastness of the cosmos. Our local group of galaxies, that's also a little speck, actually. Uh, we are in an enormous mode of existence that somehow miraculously started about 14 billion years ago in the blink of a cosmic eye, with enough energy in that instant of an instant to create all the matter that currently exists in the universe. How does that make sense? So we're part of this, and that's amazing. I say, look, enjoy the ride of your magical, miraculous existence and this incredible consciousness which you have been given, which you have, and explore it and enjoy it and appreciate it and recognize that you are actually part of this, I'm just going to say it, divine plan that is more incomprehensible than any of us can ever really understand. But that's okay too. We're lucky to be here, despite all the difficulties, all the challenges, all the triumphs and tragedies that we all exist in the course of our life. We all do have them. We're lucky to have them. We get to be part of the game. So it's great. Suffering, as any Buddhist will tell you, it's an inevitability in life. If you will be attached to all of the things of this world, and if you fail to recognize your true nature. And I think this is where spiritual teachings can help us, and actually they've helped me. I can say that on a personal level. I went for many years as I went through the whole circuit of beliefs. I believed it all, and I'm at a point where I think there's more to this existence than what I can perceive, and I'm happy to know it. So I've gotten to a point, I think, of acceptance of this amazing mystery that I'm never really going to get to the end of it all. And that's great. That's fine. I've got something really cool to do for the rest of the time that I'm here. A really interesting puzzle to try to figure out and get all the pieces. You know, my uh, a wonderful person in my family is very much older man, and he does jigsaw puzzles, like 5,000 piece, 1,000 piece jigsaw puzzles, and it's great for him. It keeps him going. This UFO mystery is like that. It's like a 50,000 piece jigsaw puzzle, which unfortunately someone taken a lot of the pieces out and thrown some fake pieces in there. So it makes it a really difficult challenge. But hey, um, it's one of the things that I can do to engage my time while I'm here and to try to understand uh, one hell of a mystery, that's for sure.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Richard, this has been the most fascinating conversation. I love talking about this stuff. And any viewers who are watching, where can they find your work?
Hmm.
Where do you recommend that they go?
Yeah, thank you. And I've enjoyed chatting with you. You ask really great questions. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Uh, I've got a YouTube channel where people can find me. It's Richard Dolan Intelligent Disclosure. Uh, and I have a website. I've got a membership website with a lot of amazing, we got a great community. It's just at richarddolanmembers.com. There's a lot of free content there. You can just go check out. I've written a lot of articles, a lot of free videos. And then there's members content, of course. So people can join that if they wish. And again, we've got a lot of members there who are extremely well versed in this and have taught me a great deal.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who's watching. And whether you're watching on WatchMojo or Unveiled, please do leave a comment if you want more of this type of content. I would love to interview more experts in this field. I feel very fortunate to have done the videos that I've already produced on these topics. And if you want to see more, then let's keep it going. So just let us know, and we'll be back soon with another guest. And until then, take care, be well, and stay curious, everybody.